Hey everybody, welcome back to an exciting episode. Today I am here with the COO of a very, very, very cool brand that you've probably heard of, but if you haven't, you're going to be stoked to learn about it because I think it's sort of a product for everybody, at least definitely some adventure seekers and some people who just want to get out there and have some fun on the water. But I'm also excited to be speaking with Alan because he a really unique perspective, not only because he's the CEO of a really cool business and he's kind of running the show, doing a lot of things, but he's also been with the company for a long time and worked his way up the ranks. And so I think he's got an awesome perspective, but also, he's the one doing all of the things now. So we're going to be able to learn a lot from him. So without further ado, I've got Alan Vaughan, the COO of Lift Foils. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
I'd love for you to just kind of kick things off and tell us a little bit about Lift Foils.
All right, sounds good. Well, I started working here, I want to say in 2013. It was very, very different back then. It was more of a custom surfboard shop. So we focused on making surfboards and SUPs, which were really big at the time. Both 12-foot, 14-foot long SUPs. And foils was just kind of something that we did on the side, and it was just for kite foils. I moved down here. My wife is Puerto Rican. She wanted to be close to the family. I didn't grow up as a surfer, so I was a bit of a oddball working there because everybody at the time that worked there was a surfer. But I did have experience running CNC machines, so I ran the two CNC machines, just like a normal table CNC, and there's one that was specific for cutting foam blanks for making the boards, the FUP boards and stuff. And I wasn't scared to use a computer. So, and I also started making foils. When I first started, we were handling in soft tools that we made foils for the kiting market. So I made probably 200 or 300 foils. And then, that little part of the business started to grow. And I was kind of training people on how to do it. Like, okay, here's how you pull a vacuum, and here's how you use a pressure to get the resin in there and this and the other. And they just kind of started throwing more responsibilities at me. They're like, well, have you ever run payroll before? I was like, no, I haven't. But, I know that 1 + 1 = 2. I was eager to learn, and they just kept throwing more responsibilities at me, daily ownership. And, I did it. So I started doing inventory management and purchasing, and it kind of just snowballed from there. So fast forward to about 2016. And that's when the first working prototype of e-foil was built. It was rough, nothing at all of what you see today. It worked, and that was super exciting. And we actually had a mishap. The factory burnt down to the ground in 2016, and the owner was overseas setting up suppliers for this e-foil thing. Right? So he basically contacted me and said, hey, don't leave, stick around. And I know it looks awful right now because the place burned down to the ground, but that was the old factory. This is going to be new. This is a new direction that we're going in. So, I just kind of oversaw the construction of the new place. So it was pretty straightforward, really, kind of setting up all the new factory. And then got it up and running. Slowly but surely started bringing back the better staff members, the production operators. I was pretty much running the entire office. I was doing payables, billables, inventory management. I was basically managing the ERP at the time and all the office stuff. And then we started to get the first couple of shipments of the first generation board that came in from our overseas supplier in China. And they had issues, and we had to work through them. We basically had to rework every single board that came in, the first couple of boards. And then we got hit by Hurricane Maria. So for your listeners who maybe don't remember or don't realize the extent of the damage, I liken it was as if we had been invaded, like World War II style, by Axis. It was no communications. That was probably the worst. No communications, no power, no water. It was rough. I was able to get my wife and my two boys who were younger at the time to go live at my parents in Georgia. And I remember my wife was like, please, but this is crazy. This is chaos. You're not even from here. Why would you stay? And I was like, do you want to come back to Puerto Rico one day? She's like, yeah. And I was like, well, then I need to stay because we have an opportunity here, and we just got this temporary setback. But it's just me. I can figure it out. As far as food, And I had a network of friends and stuff like that. It's not like I was brand new or anything like that. But I remember that was like a fork in the road where it's like, okay, do I just say this is it? My time in Puerto Rico is over. It's fun, or do I stay and like see this thing through? So I stayed. Family came back after about 8 months and stuff, and we shipped our first unit to customers, to retail customers, in May of 2018, and it's just grown since then. We moved into the building in February of 2021. We were in the square footage of the old building, but it was fairly small. It's basically a barn converted into a factory. It was maybe 5,000 square feet. Now we're in 22,000 square foot buildings. So the business has grown over the past couple of years. But that's kind of a very Reader's Digest version of Lift Foils and my involvement with it.
Love it. Yeah, good on you for sticking around and staying. For our listeners who may not be familiar with what an e-foil is, would you mind explaining it?
Yeah, absolutely. So an e-foil is basically an electrically powered hydrofoil surfboard. So basically, imagine a surfboard, and it has a keel, like a mast, if you will, and there's cables that run through it, and there is an electric motor, a brushless motor, that spins a propeller. And on the bottom of the mast is a hydrofoil wing, and it looks very similar to a wing that you would get in, or it looks very similar to an airplane that you would get in to fly around and stuff. There's the front wing, there's the back wing, and the fuselage, which is where the passengers can sit. And the board sits on the surface of the water, is powered by a lithium-ion battery, and you engage the motor with a Bluetooth hand controller. And as you engage the hand controller, and the propeller is spinning, as it starts getting sufficient speed, the board will actually lift off the surface of the water, and you're riding on the foil itself. So the foil, the wing, stays in the water, and you got about a foot and a half of air gap between the surface of the water and the board. And what that allows basically is it allows you to glide above the chop, above the white caps and stuff like that. And it's a feeling that's very, very surreal. The closest thing I could say it feels to is really fresh powder snowboarding. Like you're just gliding because there's so much less friction when you're on the foil versus on the board. And it's a feeling that's very, very special, very, very unique, because your body is aware that you're like, okay, I can move, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. As far as elevation, it's a cool feeling. It's very surreal, especially once you get the hang of it. You kind of just tune out. I know it sounds kind of hokey or whatever, but it's very true. Like you tune out and you're just focused on the present. Like, what's my speed? What does my pitch look like? And you're kind of scanning the water in front of you. Like if you're here, you're out of motion. So it's a very cool, fan sort of feeling. It's not so much like an extreme sports thing, although it certainly could be, because people can go really fast and jumps and all this craziness. But for me, it's more of a just kind of almost like a meditation state that you're in. Just you in the moment, with the merging of like man, machine, and Mother Nature. It's really cool. But anyways, that's what it is for.
Paddle boarding without a paddle on glass.
Pretty much, yeah. If you haven't experienced it, you should. It's very, very.
And you guys were the first. Correct me if I'm wrong, right?
That's true. We were the first to bring it to market and commercialize it and ship it to customers. So it's pretty cool. The first for the industry. It's we got that claim to fame. We were the first to bring it to market.
Love it. I want to come back to that later. So, you've been with Lift Foils for over a decade now, sort of rising through the ranks. I'm curious, what kept you motivated and passionate about the industry?
That's a great question. So honestly, like I said, I'm not a waterman, but I do foil and I like it, and I do surf. Later, my mid 30s is when I started, but it's not something I was doing. So I don't want to be disingenuous and say that it was the industry or whatever. It's cool. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, I very much enjoy it. For me, what the main driver was basically learning about business, learning about business processes, learning about manufacturing, learning how to be a manager, how to manage people effectively. That's really what was the main driver for me. Was there was this opportunity, blue sky, like, okay, we can do a lot of great things as far as this, the market, right? Because there isn't a lot of people out there, whatever. It's not like we're making pens or something like that. Right? Not not to knock you if you're making pens. I'm sure there's some cool innovations there and stuff, but it just allowed me this opportunity to kind of like up my my professional development, if you will. And that's really kind of what gets me going is how can I be a little bit better than I was the day before? What else can I learn to give me that edge?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I love that. Were there hurdles that you faced transitioning sort of from that more hands-on role to that leadership position? I know even before we hit record, we were even talking about, you didn't really want to manage people, or you weren't super passionate about that in the beginning, kind of thing, right? And now you're managing multiple teams. So I'm curious, were there any kind of, what were maybe some of those biggest hurdles for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Stepping outside of my comfort zone. So I've always, like when I first started, I was basically a production operator and kind of worked my way to office admin and stuff. It was always focused on just like me and my own development and things like that. And when you're working on a very detailed sort of position, whatever it may be, right, you tend to really zoom in on what those details are, which is great. I want my airplane mechanic to pay attention to what he's doing. But the further you kind of go up the hierarchy, so to speak, it's important to know that stuff exists. It's important to know the details. You don't need to know to the nth degree, because at the end of the day, you're not an operator. But you need to be able to zoom out and have a more strategic look at things instead of being so involved in tactics. And that was probably the biggest mental hurdle for me, was learning to do that. I had to basically teach myself how to not get so, like in the weeds, so to speak, and managing people. I've always been kind of, I don't want to say a loner, but I prefer solitude. I really do. But if you're going to be managing a team of people, you can't do that. You need to be able to make yourself seen in a meaningful manner. So just simple things like that, incorporate in my daily routine, like when I get to work, go straight into the office, work in the back, walk through the facility, shake hands with people, say hi, learn people's names, and, just basically making yourself available for other people so that people can approach you and talk to you. And also, so that they can see, oh, you're not just in your ivory tower in your office or whatever, you're actually like out on the floor. But just kind of, again, just breaking my comfort level and just putting myself out there. The funny thing about it is that the more you do it, the more comfortable it gets. And now I feel kind of bad. Like if I've just, like a couple of days in a row, I'm like, I haven't gone out and gone to the shop floor. And there's a concept in lean, clear production. We can talk about that, where it's called getting in the gemba. And the gemba is a Japanese word where it means like where the work is done or where the value is good. And so it's important. You don't want to be too like in the clouds, so to speak, or too esoteric in the way that you think. Because at the end of the day, whether it's in manufacturing, it doesn't really matter where. Like what customers are paying for is not overhead. They're not paying for any of that crap. What they're paying for is the value that the final product brings, whether it's tangible or intangible. So if you're going to be in a position of leadership, or if you're going to be in a position of a manager, it's very important that you go out to in the gemba, right, and see where the value is actually being created. And there's a whole host of reasons for that. It's good for kind of like the human touch, so to speak, learning the operators and all that stuff. And also from a quality, from a QA standpoint, the people that are doing the same operations day after day after day, especially the ones that are fairly bright. Like there's some guys that they just show up, clock in, clock out, and that's fine. God bless them. You need those people. But the people that are really paying attention, those are the ones that you want to talk to, because those are the ones that are going to be like, there's this issue that I encounter every single time, or every time we do this thing, right, or this production process, wouldn't it be great if we could somehow do this? And you'd be surprised. It'd be simple things, but you get probably the most useful and actionable information. And if nothing else, just information straight from the source, from the gemba. So go to the gemba. You're going to find information there.
I love that. And I respect that a lot. I think more people should do that. And it reminds me of kind of those like I love there's some business leaders who they're like, hey, I don't care what role you're in. You're going to do customer service for a couple of days. And then you're going to do this role for a couple of days. And you're going to, right. I want you to experience sort of every level of of the business before you come in as the COO, whatever it is, right? And I think like that's something even you've experienced a lot along the way, right? Sort of as you've moved up the ranks, but then also as you're interacting with everybody on the team. And I think it's also a nice sentiment. I mean, it makes me think of like that, what's it, the movie The Intern, when she goes and she's like in the factory floor, she's looking at the product. She delivered the product to her house first, saw like the customer experience, and then went back to the warehouse and was like critiquing and fixing a couple of things, like actually cares about the employees and the team members and all that stuff, right? And that absolutely, that stuff shows through, right? That the team takes pride in what they're doing. They respect you and respect the owners more. And I think it's important as well because a lot of I think especially business owners might resonate with this, but a lot of the times employees, their assumption, like they don't really have the business. Like if they haven't run a business, they don't really understand. Like this is an interesting one where I see a lot of the times employees either assume you make like a bajillion dollars or you make like nothing, right? Yeah. There's like no in between. So especially if they've never run a business. And so I think it takes maybe a little bit of those questions out, right? And because it's a tricky one, right? I mean, I don't know if you drive a Porsche. I don't think you drive a Porsche, but if you drive a Porsche story, it's like they don't know what you've done to get there, right? You don't know the blood, sweat, and tears the sweat equity you've retained in order to get there, right? The loss of the sleepless nights, the no paychecks, all the things, right? So yeah, absolutely. And I can assume with your business, there's a lot of seasonality. I'm sure you've had to try to predict, I'm sure you've got long lead times and all those types of things. You're innovating new products coming out with, I think you're up to version 4 now. And so, yeah, right. That's a lot, right? A lot of R&D and a lot of other things. So I'm curious sort of maybe along the way as those, as you've innovated and come up with new products, are you sharing that with the entire team? Are you walking through like those, achievements or the R&D process and things like that? So they're kind of along the ride with you, or is it something? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I want to be very clear. I'm not working in engineering. So so like all that stuff would reside with the engineering group. But that's you do bring up a really good point, which is basically lateral or cross function working with other people, right? It's super important to keep your finger on the pulse with the engineering team. Like I literally before this call, I just got off a call with the head engineer and the supply chain guy that were working with me, kind of understanding like new stuff coming down the pipeline. Where's this going to get built, and is this something that needs to be outsourced? You have to develop good working relationships with people that aren't necessarily like in your department, but that we all work together, right? Just like a family or just like a country, right? We all have to kind of work with each other, finance, all that stuff. So I think your question was, do I share like any sort of knowledge or anything like that with the other team members? For sure. And they do with me as well. You kind of have to, like, if you see this a lot in larger companies, and unfortunately you see it in smaller companies too, which is, it doesn't have to be that way, but you see it a lot in companies where things get so, things get so compartmentalized and it becomes kind of an us versus them sort of mentality. And it's not necessarily healthy. It can be in certain regards for very specific purposes, but by and large, I would say that's not a healthy work environment because it's not like, you work for a competitor. It's like, no, we all work for the same company. We have to kind of, if I'm not doing good, then like the other team members in their areas that they cover be doing well, and vice versa. Right? So yeah, you definitely have to share information. I think it helps to have at least like we do here. We have like a once a week meet up for just talk about the different headwinds that we're encountering and things like that. Just kind of passing information to each other, talking with your sales guys, all that stuff. Very critical, very important.
Yeah. Open communication. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I mean, you're managing a fairly large team now, and so which is no small feat. I'm curious, like, are there any strategies that you've found for just sort of effective team management and maybe even like maintaining high morales?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I would say that so there's kind of like 3 different types of employees, right? You have your climbers, which are they're your rock stars. Like, but they have a couple on your team, you know who they are. Like, they're always willing to go 100%, always willing to learn new stuff. They're awesome, right? You have your campers, which they show up, they work their 40 hours a week. They're very dependable. They do what they do, but don't expect anything more out of them. And that's fine too. Somebody's got to do the work, right? And then you have what I call the quitters, which are the people that have already retired, that's just still paying them. So how do you manage larger groups of people? Like, well, you want to spot your climbers, okay? And you want to encourage their growth. And one of my business mentors put it so succinctly. He said, "Listen, Alan, you want to find people that are better than you at what you're doing." At first, it sounds kind of like, what? Why? They're not out of a job. He's like, no. You move on to the next thing, and you just backfill your position, unless you plan on doing what you're doing for the rest of your life, right? And that's not fun. That's so cool. So you want to find and you want to kind of nurture and develop your climbers to make sure that they're able to kind of like level up. All right, cool. So now I have people that can help me manage like the more tactical in the trenches sort of thing. Very cool. I've only fired a handful of people in my time here. It's something that you should think long and hard about before you do that, because, your families and this and that. But if you're honest with yourself and like, this person's got to go, the first thing I do is I try to be like, well, maybe they're in the wrong place, right? The right person, and they should be on the bus, but they shouldn't be seated there. You try to find something else, right? If they're legitimately not a bad person. And I usually make that distinction going, do they have a good attitude? Are they teachable, right? Is there desire to learn that? If it's yes and yes, then okay, cool. Let's just find something else for you to do, right? And if it's no, absolutely, like they got to go. And you're actually doing that solid by letting them go, because then they can actually go and find something that they want to do and grow, or not, doesn't matter, but they're never going to grow if they have a bad attitude. So you let those people go. And your campers is just basically, you want to making yourself visible in a meaningful manner, just letting them know that if for nothing else, you care, right? You're there listening to them when they say like, oh man, it'd be great if we could do this, that, or the other. Sometimes it's just the simplest thing. Right? Like some people in the office are like, we don't like leaving our desk going to the top floor to get water. We have the water tower in the office so that we can, commute. Yeah, sure. Little things like that. Hey, wait, that's great. Thank you. Awesome. So I call it like up training or whatever, like kind of finding people that can level up. Cool. You do that. You encourage that. Very much so. Standardization of tasks and when they do it. So it's just standard work, making sure that those things get done in the same manner, at the same time, when they need to get done. It just makes things just so much smoother. And metrics, what gets measured is what gets done. So if there's a specific task or just something that for a while, board lamination or making the actual boards was a very important metric for me. So I just measured it every day, 8:20 production meeting. And we just went over those numbers, go, what happened here? Like we dropped, or, hey, we did really good. Let's keep that up. So if something is very critical and important to you, develop a metric, define a metric that's useful, and a good metric should drive action. So it shouldn't just be, collecting information to collect information. That doesn't work. I mean, it works, but it's not effective. Develop a good metric, review it consistently. I think really that's kind of the key word, is consistently. Go over that stuff. Let the other team members know this is important to me for the following reasons. We're going to be going over it until I see the results that I want. And that's kind of how you're able to manage larger groups of people. And you'd be surprised, actually, most people want to do a good job. They really do. Because you have to be able to give them the tools to do that. Right? Nothing gets people quicker than feeling that their immediate supervisor or manager just doesn't care. Because then they go, well, he doesn't care. Sure. The place can go to hell. So long as the place that clears. You don't want that sort of attitude. It's toxic. It spreads. It spreads, right?
Yep.
So anytime you tap into something like that, immediately you stop. Right? Even if you got to call everybody together or whatever, you put in one to quit, because if not, you can't do anything spread. And what I'm specifically talking about is bad attitude. It's like a loser sort of attitude, Not so much like, hey, why are you doing it this way? Whatever. Like constructive criticism is one thing, but just negativity, you got to nip that in the bud immediately.
Yeah, no, it becomes very toxic and it can spread. I'm with you. And Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you mentioned. It reminds me of the EOS People Analyzer. Have you seen that before? 'Cause it sounds like it's pretty much what you described.
No.
It's
What
great.
is
You
that?
literally described it. So props to you, Alan, for not even knowing what it is. But there's an awesome tool for for everybody out there who manage teams or any individuals. If you just Google EOS People Analyzer, it's this nice little chart that essentially what happens is you list your team members out and you list your core values, and you kind of give them a plus or minus, right, of sort of like where they are on the core values. And then the last three things are you put three that are gets it, wants it, and capacity. And you either have a yes or a no in each of those. And so to your point, they've got to align on the core values, right? We've got to make sure that they're a good fit for the business, which hopefully happened even in the interview process. You never know. And then it's like, okay, if they fit on our core values, then do they get it? Yes, they get it. Do they want it? No, they don't want it. Oh, there's a problem. Or yes, they do want it. And then do they have the capacity to learn it or fix it or whatever it is? And then if they have a yes across the board, that it's someone you'd never let go, because it's like, okay, like there's something we have to solve. But if there's a no or a clear, misalignment with core values, then it's like, okay, this person might not be a fit. And exactly like you said, it's better to let them go because there's a better opportunity for them anyways, or they're in the wrong seat, whatever it is. And so I love that. And I love the metric thing you mentioned too. I know a business coach where he pushes this really hard, and like he says, everyone should have a number. Like he even gives the example, his assistant has a post-it on her desk that says 3 rings. So their phone's never allowed to get to 3 rings without being answered. And that's like her metric, right? And so then if it gets to 3 rings, she'll literally like run to him and apologize. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, because that's her number. And then it's so true to her, right? It rings true. Like she knows that's her number. And so he's like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Like no big deal that it got 3 rings like one time, whatever. But it is true, right? I think it's helpful when your team members have like their North Star metric that's tied to your North Star metric, because then they also kind of know their impact on the business, and they're like, okay, I understand how this cog in the wheel helps in like the overall vision, and then they feel good and they have purpose because they're assisting the main mission, right, of whatever that is in the business.
Man, you said something that rings so true, and it's basically, I do feel that most people, aside from your quitters and stuff, but most people, they want to do a good job. But aside from, like I mentioned, that number one way to disenfranchise people is just apathy, right? They just feel that they don't care. The next way I would say to disenfranchise your workforce is lack of clear direction. So yeah, you point them in the direction, say, hey, we're going this way, and this is what we're measuring. We're going to define what good looks like. Okay. And good looks like we're more marching towards this North Star. It gets people engaged. And I don't know why, but particularly men, I've noticed. I've worked predominantly with men. I do work with some females, but men, for some reason, we're so mission orientated that if we have a clear understanding of what the mission is and how to gauge our success against it, most guys will be like, hell yeah, let's go. Know which way we're going. All right. But like ambiguity, I'm just going to say ambiguity, it irritates people because they're like, where are we going? Does anybody even know? Like there's a clear lack of leadership. Like no bueno.
Yep. Oh no, absolutely. Yeah. We need a pat on the back, right? Men just need to be told we're doing a good job. Then we're happy, right? For all the women out there, that's all we want. Right? So
we're so simple. We're so simple.
Exactly. So, absolutely. No, I love that. And so earlier you mentioned lean principles. And so I'd love to lean into that, pun intended. So, I mean, how have you implemented lean principles maybe to optimize production processes, and maybe what impact has this had on the company's efficiencies?
It's huge. It's huge. And we are by no means like, lean champions. Like the thing about it is that it's almost like a business philosophy in the sense that like it's a different way of thinking, right? And the Japanese, to their credit, they really developed something very special. If your listeners and viewers want to kind of dig into that, start with the earlier books that were written by the Japanese Management Association in the late 80s and early 90s. Like they really had their finger on the pulse of basically driving out waste. And really, that's what it's all about. It's all about driving out waste and inefficiencies so that you don't bake it in, increase your cost, increase your price, and then deliver it to the customer. For them, that was a cardinal sin. They said, absolutely not. We cannot do that. And there's variety of reasons why they felt so strongly about it, because at the time they were competing against the big three. The big three automakers in the United States are like, the only way we're going to get a leg up in this world in auto manufacturing on a global scale, reduced waste, right? So it is a daunting task when you start looking into it and you look at all the different pillars of lean. You go, oh my God, this is, you just realize, like, to do it right, when you really do your research, you go, this is a lot. I don't know if I can manage it. Start small. Biggest, you start with the building blocks, and if you don't know what 5S, you can look it up, but it's basically organizing. Everything has a place and every place has a thing, right? It's so simple. We tend to overcomplicate things. I don't know why. Maybe it's our ego or something, but like, it is truly meant to be simple. And it's just basically clear organizations, because you want to reduce the waste of walking around, the waste of looking for like the tool. Oh, where's that socket wrench? That sort of stuff. But the hardest S is the 5S. This is sustaining. So like, okay, we cleaned our room. That's great. Now let's keep it clean. Right? So just doing things like that, observing the natural flow of things. And what I mean by that is that the flow of product as it goes through the shop. You want to be very intentional with that physical movement, because you don't think about it. You're like, okay, it takes 5 more seconds to go this way. Well, those 5 seconds add up. They really do. If 8 hours a day, or you're working, if you have a double or 3 shifts in a day, whatever, it's almost like the stone gardens, that the Japanese have. Like, you're really looking for what is the ideal flow of, and it's not just physical products. This stuff can be applied in an office as well, like the flow of information, basically, so that it reaches its destination, in an efficient manner. So, it's the flow of standardization. Say that it is very important. It's not just about reducing variability. You can go into the whole statistical analysis as far as like, repeatability and reproducibility. It's much more simple than that. You can geek out on that Six Sigma stuff, and, more power to you. But it's much more simple than that. The reason why standardization is important: how in the world do you expect to measure progress if you don't know what the standard is? You have to set the standard. That is why it's so important, because that is your baseline. It doesn't have the standard is just basically, okay, here's where we are today. All right. Then you analyze it, looking for the 8 forms of waste. Now you have something to measure progress against. If you don't have that, then it's randomness, and it doesn't work, right? And again, all of this stuff is literally because you're trying to squeeze out waste, because waste is hidden cost, and all you end up doing is just passing that cost on to the consumer. That's not good, because if you don't do it, your competition will, and you will suffer, and you will lose market share for it. So it's simple. It really is, but the impact is it's important. Anyways,
Oh no.
I'm sorry. Kind of
Yeah.
went from things
No.
there. You asked, like,
No, I love
specifically,
it though.
do
But
you implement that stuff into the shop? There needs to wait. Pretend for a moment that if you're working with physical stuff, that you are the product that's being sent around. Try to view things through the lens of, there's a vendor and there's a customer. Who is the customer? Like, paint in this example is the customer. Well, who is his vendor? Well, what's the step before that, right? And what does that flow look like? And does it make sense? Like, look for bottlenecks, right? What bottlenecks are usually indicative. The bottleneck isn't the problem. It's usually indicative of a larger problem. Okay, well, we need to balance our line efficiency. Maybe we have too many people working here, which is why you're seeing this big pileup of WIP, work in process. And again, I'm talking about tangible stuff, but the same thing applies in the digital office standpoint, Why do all these things keep piling up, all these emails or whatever, keep piling up on this individual desk? Well, maybe we need to reallocate our line efficiency, because everything needs to flow. So, yeah, there's a variety of ways that you can implement that. There's a variety of ways that we have implemented that here, but it all starts with 5 standardization and workflow. The movement has to make sense. It can't be arbitrary. It can, but it's not ideal.
yeah. No, I love that. It's kind of like the keep it simple principle, but then, yeah, I mean, it's one we've, it's been one that as we've grown and tried to implement more SOPs and more processes, all those things, it's like, it's a slippery slope, because then it's like, okay, I don't want to make an SOP for an SOP. right? And it gets tricky, right? And there's so many layers to every business, but especially when you're in manufacturing and you've got so many different aspects to it that it's, everything needs to work together and succinctly. But then on the other hand, it's easy to overcomplicate, and then too many processes creates bottlenecks and all sorts of things. So yeah, it makes perfect.
5 whys. I don't know. I was introduced to lean a couple of years ago, and the more I dug into it, the more it kind of makes sense. It doesn't make sense for all businesses, but if you're running a smaller business, I would say it makes sense. 5 whys. So you can normally get to root cause by asking why 5 times. Now, you're not like a petulant child and you're just, asking to ask, and, that's ridiculous. But what you're really trying to do is you're on a fact-finding mission, right? You're trying to separate, well, that's a symptom. Okay, well, what caused that, right? Well, why did that happen? Well, because of this. Why did that happen, right? And you can usually get to it on your 5th why. Anything more than that, and you're just being ridiculous. You're being immature, but simplicity is key. For sure. Like if we need to overcomplicate things, and I read a really interesting quote over the weekend from Jeff Bezos, and I'm paraphrasing, but it basically said something along the lines that if the anecdotes and your data doesn't match up, chances are the anecdote is usually correct, and there's something wrong with the way that you're measuring the data. And I take that as basically like it may make sense on paper, maybe, but maybe like we're overcomplicating something, and there's got to be a more simple way to do this, and simplicity is key for sure. Things that are too complicated, nobody will follow. It's too complicated. An SOP for an SOP for an SOP, too complex. People aren't going to do it, and you're going to backslide. Simple is key. Simple is elegant. Simplicity is very elegant, and that's what we want. We want elegant, simple solutions to our problems.
Yep. No, absolutely. I'm curious on that. Like, how have you balanced maybe the demands of sort of short-term operational needs with long-term strategic goals?
That's a tough one. Learning to zoom out, learning to trust people, learning to trust when somebody is sufficient in their capacity and in their training to be like, I don't need to babysit this person. I don't need to micromanage this person. They got it. Now let me zoom out and focus on 12, 18, 24, 36 month plan and what that looks like. Another thing too, that I think this just comes with being a hyper detail oriented person. You're very quick to kind of determine what the boundaries are of whatever system it is that you're working on. That's really good in a specific context. When you're learning to kind of like blue sky it, you need to learn to deconstruct or not immediately put limitations on what it is that you're doing, because one, you're blue skying stuff, right? Let's think like there's no limitations. Get all that stuff off the table. If we could do what we really wanted to do, money wasn't an issue, what does that look like? What does ideal look like? Then you can start picking stuff apart going, well, we can't do this in the next 18 months because of the following reasons or whatever. But learning to not immediately just, put the structure on this thing, it's hard. And it's hard because it requires a little bit of creativity. And I am of the firm belief that like a truly creative person is rare. Creativity is it's not something that a lot of people have. I don't. For example, I'm really good at creative problem solving, but that is again within the context of a specific thing. So I understand what the boundaries are, I understand what the rules of the game. But being able to, even if it's just temporarily, remove those limitations so that you can kind of blue sky strategize what the next, and the further you go out in the future, the less constraints there should be, because there's so many unknowns. I'm sorry, but you're not smart enough to consider all variables. Nobody is. We're not computers, right? So it should be less specific the further you go out into the future. And you should always be revising that. And again, it's a standardization thing. It's not even a standardization thing. That's not even the right word. It's consistency. Going back and reviewing those sort of kind of big picture plans and stuff on a consistent basis. I've been very guilty of this. I'll do it. I'll do the deep work, figure it out. Cool. And then we move on. What happens? Well, things change, because things change as we move forward to the future. That's fine. But you should also be updating your deep work plans as well, because if they're based on stuff that was true a couple months ago, you should probably update that, right? Consistent is holding yourself accountable, going, okay, I should do this at least on a monthly basis, maybe by once every 2 months or something.
Yep. No, I love that because I also feel like when you don't look at it at the 20,000 foot view, then you're automatically like, okay, how do I get from A to E? Well, it's A, B, C, D, and E. But then if you go, well, no, forget all that. We're trying to get to F. How do we get to F? You might even find ways to skip B, C, and D and just immediately jump to E. Right.
Yeah,
But I think when you don't look at it that
yeah,
way, then you're in the weeds. You're looking at like, okay, this is how we've done it. So this is how we're gonna do it. And then this is the way that we get there. And that is still probably the way to get there, but it might not be the fastest, most efficient, most whatever way, to get there. So I love that. That's cool. Do you find yourself doing that cross teams, or do you end up keeping that sort of more tight knit to just like the team, that one team structure, or?
more tight knit, specifically with operations.
Sure.
Yeah, and just because I don't know enough about, for example, marketing, right? For me to kind of jump in there and tell the chief of marketing, hey, it would be really cool if you did this, that, and the other. But yeah, well, here's what you don't know. All these following factors are into my decision. So I try to just maintain myself within the sphere that I know I have the greatest influence on, which is operations. And for me, I look at operations very simple. It's basically engineers come up with like, hey, this is the product that we're going to come up with, right? And these are the specifications, and they get super specific. Okay, cool. Marketing basically says, here's how we're going to sell it. Sales, they go out and sell it. Finance is there to make sure that, we keep the lights on. An operations job is basically do what the engineers said that we should do, right? So follow the recipe and do it in a way where we're living up to the expectations that we're setting for our customers, which is set by the marketing group, right? So I want to make sure that I do what I'm tasked to do well, right? And not get too involved in other people's areas. It's tricky, right? Because like we should work together and should be collaborative, but at the same time, you have to trust that the person that's in charge of that is doing a good job and that they're, whatever metrics that the executive management is holding them to is, this, that, and the other. You just want to be very careful. I've seen it happen personally where people get too involved and they have too many fingers in other pies, so to speak, and they become less effective at what they were supposed to be doing. It's a slippery slope.
Yep.
So
Oh, makes perfect sense. Yeah, I love it. Any productivity hacks that's maybe transformed the way you work?
yes, actually, it's going to sound maybe a little corny, but it worked for me. Is every morning I have a gratitude journal, right? And I know you're probably like, what kind of new age nonsense is that? Maybe, but it works. And there's a little bit of thought that goes into it, right? So basically, what I do, and this is not my idea, by the way. I didn't come up with this. This is kind of a culmination of different things that I've picked up along the way. And it's basically, if you focus on your problems, all you're going to see is your problems, right? And it is helpful to identify the problems, but it's not helpful to constantly just, nobody wants to be around a Debbie Downer. You don't even want to be around yourself when you're done. So a good way I've found to combat is every morning I write down 5 things that I'm grateful for. It could be anything, right? It could be, I got a car. Oh, that's great, right? The more you do it, it becomes almost like a ritual, and you really, and it's the first thing you do in the morning. You brush your teeth, all that stuff. You're sitting there with your cup of coffee. Before your emails, treat it as if it's the most important thing you're going to do. And you write down 5 things that you're grateful for. Every day you do it. You start realizing all of the blessings that you have. Right? And it changes the way that your mind views things, right? And then after that, I write down my goals, right? 5 goals, and you write them down. What are the top 5 things that I have to get done today? I have to get done today, or at least get started on, right? Maybe not done, because some of them are monsters, right? But I have to at least get started, eat that frog, stop procrastinating, get it done. You do that. Then you go about your day, right? It's helpful to have that stuff. Again, going back to standard work, and it depends on what you do. Some people I've seen will take standard work and detail it out by the 30-minute interval. I think that's a little extreme, but it is helpful having that list saying, hey, I told myself that these are the 5 things I have to do today, right? And I didn't do them. Well, oh my God, it's 1:00. I better get on, right? Or I need to recalibrate my day. Okay, well, let's be realistic with what I can accomplish. At the bottom here, there's a line. That's the end of my day. Then I write down victories. What are small victories that I did today? Whatever it may be, right? It doesn't matter. But you write it down. And there's a reason why. Something about the physical, and try to handwrite, not typing. My handwriting is awful. It's getting worse the older I get, because I just don't do it that much anymore. But something about the physical act of writing It does something. I don't know what it is, but it really does do something in your mind. And you see yourself literally stacking like victories. And it's just like, it's like a little boost. And then you write down your goals again, right before you go to bed, so that you let your subconscious mind get to work and start going, okay, this is what I want to accomplish. And we can talk about SMART goals. If you don't know what it is, you can look it up. It's an acronym, SMART goals. It's a specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound. You basically hold yourself accountable and don't write like crazy stuff like, I want to be president of the IMF. Like, maybe not, but, I want to weigh a certain amount at a specific point in time. Okay, that's a SMART goal. Anyways, something about just organizing my thoughts. One, starting with gratitude. What are you grateful for? It doesn't matter who you are. You got to be grateful for something. Even if you just can only muster one thing. I'm alive and I got out of bed. Well, hallelujah, right? That's something. It changes the way that you view the world, and that's important. And then quieting your mind and organizing things into just 5. Don't go crazy. Don't be writing like 25 things, just 5 things. Your top 5 for the day, the things that you're grateful for, your goals, all that stuff. Something about just literally making that list and stopping and thinking first thing in the morning, it gives me focus. It gives me focus, which is a big productivity hack. I literally detail out what I want to get accomplished, and it helps quiet my mind. It helps quiet the noise because, we all experience this in the modern world, right? There's just so much noise. You're just trying to find signal. Just show me the signal. Making it really helps. I don't know why, but it does.
I love it. And I'm with you. I do something very similar. Mine's 3 goals because apparently I'm not as productive as you, Alan. But
all good, man. Even if it's just 1, that's better than 0.
It's right. I also think like the higher up the ranks you go, maybe the smaller they become. But like you have less because they're bigger projects. They take more time, and you just got to be making some progress towards it. But I like that. I agree with you. Kind of 3 to 5, I think is perfect. And then I love the grateful. I mean, it's so important for anybody, no matter who you are. It's so important, and it does completely change your mindset, like you're saying, because you start coming from a gratitude, from a place of gratitude and abundance, right? And you can actually retrain sort of your scarcity mindset, I feel like,
yes.
And scarcity doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. It could be, oh, I don't have enough time at work, or I don't have enough whatever, right? Mm-hmm. You start having, it's so easy for us. I feel like society sort of forces us into this scarcity mindset all the time. And so, I mean, it's, I appreciate you for saying that. So there's probably one grateful thing I am for today, for meeting you, Alan, and having you on the podcast and sharing all this awesome advice. And it's absolutely an awesome thing. I appreciate you kind of ending things on that. Yeah. And any one last question I ask everybody, any book recommendations you have, either something you're reading now or something that's helped you and your career along the way?
Career specific stuff?
Doesn't have to be career specific. Yeah. Anything you want to share.
I read a book recently. I think the author's name is Cal Newport, called Deep Work. I think everybody should check out that book. It's basically the importance between shallow work, which is your day-to-day stuff, emails and, things that are urgent but not critical, and deep work, which is where, the author details it, where basically you may have to physically separate yourself, like go to a coffee shop, whatever, and you just focus in on the stuff that you could only do when you were 100% focused. Like take your cell phone, put on silent, flip it upside down, whatever it takes. And even if it's just an hour a day, that level of concentration, it's just, as the book would say, deep work. It's powerful, very powerful. I'd say check that one out. I gave my son George Orwell's 1984 for Christmas, and he actually just finished reading it. And I was kind of thumbing through it, and I was like, this book changed the way that I see things, and not for conspiracy or anything like that. That's not for me the most important thing in the book. The most important thing in the book was the concept of newspeak, and not necessarily that concept, but the power that language has in our minds. Maybe a lot of people don't get that from that book. That's Big Brother or whatever. That's fine. That's important stuff too. But like the power that language has and how we construct and deconstruct reality. So in that book, there's this second language that they're developing in this society, and every year the vocabulary becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And the reason for that is because they said, well, we want to eliminate words for dissent and rebellion, because if those words don't exist, then the thoughts can't be had, and we can completely eliminate that threat altogether. Interesting concept, but for me, the most interesting thing was that there is power in language. So what does that mean? Like kind of, zooming out, right? It means be mindful of your thoughts, be mindful of, what you say to yourself, be mindful of the words that come out of your mouth, right? Because there is power in words, and that's how we interpret reality, right? We use words to describe things. So it's much more powerful than we give it credit for. So and I tell this to my kids all the time, like, be very, very mindful of the thoughts that you allow to enter your mind, because it's in the background and it's working. It's either going to be working for you, or it's going to be working against you. You get to decide. Yep. I know that's kind of a weird book to throw out there, but like I said, my son finished reading it and I was thumbing through it and I was like, oh yeah, that's why I love this book so much. It's just a wild concept, the power of language.
I love that. And you're absolutely right. Like it influences everything, right? Is your frame sort of determines your mindset, and then your mindset actually determines your actions. So if your frame is not right, then your actions are going to be all out of whack and your mindset's not going to be good, right? But a lot of people, I think, get to the mindset portion, but they don't quite look at the actual frame. How are they framing things? How are they looking at, like, the whole thing, right? And I think that goes back to your gratitude aspect, right? Because then you start being thankful for all the stuff and even the little things, right? Like, oh, I'm so thankful I can just make a cup of coffee and I have it and here it is, right? And so I'm so fortunate. So yeah, I'm with you. And I love the deep work one. I think one hack that I found lately was there's the Rise Sleep app that I really have been digging. And when you kind of track your sleep with it, it tells you your sleep debt and whatnot. And sleep's so important. But the nice thing it tells you is sort of your dip, like your peak, your morning peak, your afternoon dip, and like your evening peak. And so I found if I kind of try to do that deep work during my morning peak, it is when I kind of get the best work done. And especially kind of before that afternoon dip. And then for like my evening peak, that's when I go to the gym and crush it. And so versus if I do it in my afternoon dip, my workouts aren't as good, even though it's earlier in the day. So just for me personally, I think everybody's different. Yeah.
No, working out first thing in the morning, to me, I much prefer to do the deep work in the morning and do the physical activity in the.
Yeah, I'm with you. I can't do it. I can't do it. Lots of protein during the day and then go for it. I crush it. So Alan, again, I really, really appreciate it, and awesome advice across the board. I really encourage anybody out there to check out Lift Foils. It's an awesome product. And you've got a huge product array. I mean, I think that's what's nice is you've got the regular foils, you've got e-foils. I mean, there's a lot of products that you guys have for, I think, no matter what your level of, experience or I guess how far you want to take it, let's say, right? Whether you're just a noob and you just want to get out on the water, or you're sponsored by Red Bull. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for listening. And we will hope everybody has a great day. Thanks again, Alan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.